What's happening, YouTube? It's Simon466 Cards, and today we're going to talk about the biggest lie in the hobby, in my opinion. And that's the saying that sports card prices are correlated with player performance. Now, obviously, hype drives a lot of card pricing in the hobby, but what happens when you're in year 3, year 4, year 5 of a player's career? How do you value cards at that point? So I will explain to you the methodology that I use to value sports cards. But before we do that, let's take a step back. Let's take a look at some great players in basketball. So the first one I'm going to talk about is someone I talk about a lot on my IG, Russell Westbrook, who is not exactly a personal favorite of mine, but you cannot deny who he is. He's a MVP. He's on the 75th anniversary team, which means he's one of the greatest 75 players of all time. And yet you look at his cards. I'm just looking at Topps Chrome because that's pretty uniformly kind of best set, but that's still readily available for this era. Topps Chrome PSA 10 Russell Westbrook base rookie card. Pop is 131. It's crazy. And it sells for $350. So the market cap, which is the price times the pop, is $44,000 only. Okay. Well, you might be saying to yourself, okay, well, that's Russell Westbrook. He only has one MVP. He didn't win a title. He's not an all-time great. So it's maybe there's a reason why his cards are worth so low. Okay. Well, then let's go to Steve Nash, 2-time MVP. Again, 75th anniversary team, 7-time All-NBA, 8-time All-Star, 5-time assist champion. His pricing is not that much different. $380. Again, pop is 164. Market cap is $65,000. And I think this would have been a lot higher, but he didn't win a championship with the 7 seconds or less Suns. As a result, both him and Russell Westbrook, not exactly iconic players, just very good or even great players. So you're saying, well, but he didn't win a title, so that's why he's not iconic, right? So that's why his value is so low. All right, well, let's talk about Dwayne Wade. All right, we have 3-time champion, finals MVP. You can see here in the top right corner, 75th anniversary team yet again. And yet you look at his cards, again, about $300. Pop is $1,000 now because this is 2003 base, and so the market cap here is about $300,000. So okay, that's a little bit higher, but like nowhere near the level of like a LeBron or an MJ, obviously, right? And so you're probably saying, well, yeah, but he never won league MVP, so he doesn't have the combination of titles and MVP. That's a fair point. It's a fair point. Well, let's now look at someone who is undoubtedly one of the greatest of all time. 15-time All-Star, 15-time All-NBA, 3-time Finals MVP, 5 times champion, 2-time MVP. Again, 75th anniversary team. I'd say top 10 player easily. Look at his cards. You're like, okay, $300, pop of $2,400 for his Topps Chrome rookie card from 1997. So his market cap is $800,000 and change. So just a little bit under $1 million for his market cap. Fair enough. So this is now we're getting into some real substance, right? $800,000 market cap. Let's keep those numbers in mind, right? For the first two guys, he was less than 100. Dwayne Wade was 300K. Now we're in 800K territory. Let's look at some second bananas, famous second bananas, I'm calling this, or famous Robins. Klay Thompson, 200K market cap, $200 rookie card price for his 2012 Prism PSA 10. And then Scottie Pippen for his Fleer, very low pop of $250, and the price is $1,700 for market cap is $400K. So these guys are right around the Dwayne Wade range, around 200 to 400K. Tim Duncan in the 800K. Now let's compare these numbers to modern players. I'm going to pick Trae Young and Zion Williamson. So they're Silver Prisms, again, kind of the card that represents them the best from this era. The Silver Prism, you can see for Trae Young, $2,300, $200 per card. So the market cap is $460K. Same thing with Zion, $500 plus dollars, market cap $900K. So this Zion card market cap is more valuable than Tim Duncan. Trae Young is more valuable than Dwayne Wade, Steve Nash, Russell Westbrook. Same thing with design cards. So basically what this is saying is if Trae Young or Zion end up having the career in the next 10 years of a Dwayne Wade, a Steve Nash, Russell Westbrook, their card prices are pretty much destined to go down. And that's like, if they have any one of those careers, I think that's a top 3 percentile outcome for these guys, right? Very unlikely to happen. So that's what leads to the title of this video, which is that sports card prices are not at all correlated with player performance. That leads to the natural question, how do you value sports cards? And so that's what we'll talk about for the rest of the video. So for me, for a card to have significant long-term value in the hobby, there's 2 ways to do this. The first one is the card itself is iconic. So for example, a PMG, this Stephon Marbury, not at all a famous or iconic or memorable player. I mean, he's memorable, maybe not for the greatest reasons. Still sold for $7,000 at a PWCC auction May of 2023. $7,000 for a BGS 8, but that's because the card itself is iconic. We have a 2020 Prism gold Prism of Jimmy Butler, so not a rookie card. This is the 8th year Jimmy Butler card, but it's sold for nearly $1,000 in, again, May 2023 because, of course, gold Prisms for this era are iconic. The card itself is iconic. Here's a Nebula 1 of 1 from Optic for Ben Simmons, non-rookie, $840, sold in October of 2022. Again, Ben Simmons, not exactly on anybody's favorite player list in the last few years, but because a Nebula 1 of 1 is iconic, this sells for almost $1,000. And then you have something like this, a Tim Duncan Logo Man from National Treasures in 2009, it seems like, and it sold on PWCC for $10,000 in May of 2023. Again, Logo Man cards, iconic, right? And so this is all to say, if the card itself is iconic, it almost doesn't matter who the player is. It'll have long-term value for most collectors, and that's how you sustain long-term value for these type of cards. Now, that's the first premise. The second premise is if the player himself, I suppose, is iconic. And so that leads to the natural question, how do you define iconic, right? And so I'm using what I'm calling the iconic line. And so here are players that are above the iconic line. You got Wilt, MJ, LeBron, Kareem, Steph, Kobe. So how to read this is on the x-axis here on the bottom, you have a player's career. You roughly max out at 20 years. On the y-axis here is what I'm calling performance. And so as a player's career unfolds, they will build up more and more of a legacy in terms of their performance, and so their trajectory will increase and improve over time, in theory, right? But this just measures performance, and how you measure that, it is completely ambiguous and abstract for a reason, because there's no real easy way. There are some metrics out there, but this is more of an abstract exercise, right? And so I don't think anybody will disagree that these players are iconic, the ones I have above this red iconic line. And so what makes these players above the iconic line and or makes them iconic? So 4 things. I've narrowed it down to 4 things. 1 is they're a generational GOAT. 2 is they have individual achievements. 3, they're the number 1 guy on a champion. 4, they inspire emotion. And so as a result, if we go back to some of the players we were talking about earlier, Tim Duncan, he's right on this line of iconic. Generational GOAT, yeah. Individual achievements, yeah. Number 1 guy on champion, yep. Inspires emotion, that's where he kind of misses out, and that's why he's like right on the cusp of this iconic line. And I should state, this is iconic for the hobby, which is different than like real life iconic. Let's go to Steve Nash. Never won a champion, misses out on number 3. I think if he had won a champion with 7 seconds or less Suns, this would change his career and how he's perceived completely. Dwayne Wade wasn't a generational GOAT. And so now let's talk about players who are currently playing and where they stand on this relative to the iconic line. So you have Giannis, 2 titles and MVP, pretty charismatic guy, so he's up there. Joker, 2 MVPs, not yet a title, maybe one coming soon. I'm recording this on June the 5th. but again, doesn't have the greatest personality, or just doesn't inspire the emotion. So he's a little bit further off than Giannis. Then you have Luka. He doesn't do any of these four things yet. He hasn't accomplished anything. He's way down at the bottom. He's obviously still in year 4 compared to Joker and Giannis, who are further in their careers. But this is just the model in my mind that I use. And so, okay, I've now defined an iconic. Hopefully, this gives you a sense of how I'm looking at iconic as defined by the hobby, right? And so now the question becomes, how do I use this iconic line, this ambiguous thing that I've developed? How do I use it to value current players? So now I'm looking at a player. You can see this is an actual player in my mind. He starts off year 1, year 2, has a little bit of a jump in year 3. Year 4 levels out. Year 5 kind of dips down a little bit. Who is this player? It's Trae Young. And at this point, to me, it seems highly unlikely that Trae Young will become an iconic player in 2023, based on what we're seeing, right? And so how does that play into how I value cards? Well, it's basically, what is the probability that a player is going to reach this iconic line? You use that same probability. So it's like, at this point, I'm going to say Trae Young has like probably a 5, maybe 10% chance of being iconic. That's how you value his long-term hobby value. It's like, okay, you look at iconic values and then take 5 or 10% of that. And that's how you should value Trae Young cards. And so basically what I'm doing now, if I'm looking for cards to invest in, if it's for my PC, it's totally different. Buy whatever you want. But if you are looking to invest in cards, it is solely based off of who do I think is on the trajectory to be iconic, and what is their probability, and how does that fit in relative to their card prices. So I am now going to give you another example of how you translate this over from performance to value. Let's talk about a random player. He gets drafted. Obviously, his performance is 0. He gets drafted. First 2 years goes well. He's on a little bit of an upward trajectory. Then he kind of levels off a bit. He's still improving, but not that much. And now we're at like year 5. At year 5, look how far he is from reaching that iconic line, right? He is not going to. There's basically no shot. And so, whereas in year 1, year 2, there's still a shot. Like, he still has a lot to go to reach this line. But he has a shot. But by year 5, it's not happening. Like, it would take a remarkable turnaround. It'd have to be like basically Jimmy Butler-esque, but on an even bigger magnitude, right? And so by year 5, you have a pretty good idea of whether this is happening. So your probability of him becoming iconic in year 1 is a non-zero number. There's a chance. Year 5, the number is essentially 0. And so what happens to his card prices? Let's take a look over here on how that impacts his card prices. Basically, year 1, he had a chance. Rookie year, he had a chance of being iconic, so he's up here. By year 4, year 5, we know based off of this, he's never reaching this line, so his card prices essentially become 0, or like $50 or something. And so it doesn't matter that for the rest of this guy's career, he's still steadily improving. He has no shot of becoming an iconic player, and as a result, he is never going to have long-term value. And so as a result, he's built a nice resume, but he's never come close to being iconic, and his hobby value flatlines for the rest of his career. It doesn't really have a lot of bumps. And so who is a perfect definition of this type of player? It's Jrue Holiday. Solid player, great player to have on your team, does a lot of the intangibles, great defense, improves every year. I mean, I think he's turning 32, 33, year 13. I think he had the best player or best year of his career, to be totally honest. But he's never going to be the guy, right? And so he is a perfect example, but he's so, despite being a very solid, kind of number 2, number 3, he's so not at all iconic that he has 0 cards in card ladder's index. 0. He's not at all hobby relevant. His Topps Chrome Gold Refractor, number to 50, sold for $1,000, BGS 9.5. And a raw out of 500 refractor from Topps Chrome sold for $100, a little over $100. For comparison, Steph Curry is in the same draft class. His gold refractor BGS 9.5 sold for $138,000. His BGS 9.5 or PSA 10 refractor out of 500 sold for $16,884K compared to $100 and $1,000, right? Like, that's the difference between iconic and being a good solid player. And that's how I value these cards. It's about, are you going to reach the iconic, Steph Curry line, or are you not? What's your likelihood of reaching that? And, like, to be honest, the chances of you reaching that are not very good. And so that basically tells me players are not going to be investable in the long term. Like many players, most players. I'd say the large, overwhelming majority. But that's for the long term. How does that affect investing in the short term? Well, here's what we know. On day one of a product release, most players' card values will be here. And we know that the inevitable long-term outcome by year 5, year 6, year 4, whatever it is, it's going to be close to zero because, again, 98, 99% of these players are not going to be investable in the long term. So we know the trend is going to be from whatever the starting price is to zero or close to zero, $50, whatever. But not everything operates in a straight line. But this is the general slope and trend. But you might have someone who just flames out in year 1 and basically bombs. Think of a James Wiseman, for example. This is what James Wiseman's cards look like. Or you could have a guy hold on for a couple of years, maintain some hobby value for a couple of years before it becomes obvious, like, oh, there's some problems with this guy. I think a perfect example of this type of chart, not necessarily exactly this, but Zion, maybe to a lesser extent, Ja Morant, right? The bloom is off that rose, or for those two players. And so, well, you're probably saying, okay, but not everything goes down in a straight line. There are obviously cards that bounce back up for a little bit. Like, you can't say that they never go back up, right? And I would agree that's true, right? The general trend is down, but you could do something like this: be trending down, it goes up for a little bit, but inevitably we know where this ends. It ends with them going back down, right? And it might be a more steep drop, and then in year 2, a player has like a good start to have their prices bounce back up for a little bit. But again, we all know where this is going. They're all going to zero. And then in this case, we have what I'm calling the Zion bounce. And, maybe at the start of next year, he opens up the season, guns a-blazing. Oh, no, wait, that's Ja Morant, sorry. He opens up the season on fire, and his prices jump back up. But I think at this point, the likelihood of Zion becoming iconic is zero. So even if there is a little bit of a bounce, we all know where this is going. And why am I creating all of these different scenarios? What I'm telling you is, if you're buying cards of ultra modern players, current players, the odds are very much against you. You are basically going, like, the odds, I would say, or the comparison I would make is, you're going into a casino where the odds are very much against you, except they are way worse than in a casino, where I think it's like a 3 to 5% edge depending on the game. It depends how you play it. Whereas I would say for sports cards, the odds are against you the longer you hold it, and in a much more stark way. So I would basically just say, unless the card itself is iconic, whether it's like a gold prism 1 of 1, something like that, basically stay away from all ultra modern stuff, and all ultra modern players, because the vast majority of them will not have any long-term value, which is a sad thing to say, but I think this is true. And I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but like, buy them if you want for your PC, but if you're looking for long-term investment purposes, history tells us this is not likely. And so that leads us to, well, how do I evaluate which players are investable? There's like the 98% of players who are not investable. How do I figure out who the 2% are? And so here are the criteria. First one is generational GOAT, not quote. Does the player have potential to be a generational GOAT? So I'm basically saying avoid players who don't have potential to be a top 5 player in the league. And I'm sticking with basketball for most of this, but I think this would apply to generally any sport: hockey, football, baseball. I think this is all generally applicable. So avoid your Jaylen Browns, your Kevin Porters, your Jamal Murrays. These guys are never going to be top 5 player in the league, and they have no chance to be, right? So just nip that in the bud and don't buy those cards. If you, again, for investing purposes only, if you love these guys, PC them, knock yourself out. Second one is individual achievement. Does this player have the potential to win MVP or be the number one option on a contender? So you avoid players who can't be the focus of an offense. So Triple J, Tyrese Maxey, Desmond Bane, Keldon Johnson, RJ Barrett, Michael Porter Jr., these type of guys, avoid. Think about the iconic number 2s that I showed you at the beginning. Klay Thompson, Scottie Pippen, 2 of the greatest number 2s of all time. They barely have any value, right? Klay Thompson card, PSA 10 base prism, worth a couple $100. Scottie Pippen's worth is $1,700, but that's because it was like a very, very low pop of, I think it was like $200, right? So avoid basically anybody who can't be a number 1 option. Third one is titles, and this is where it gets interesting. This is not about the player anymore. It's now about the team. You can't win a title by yourself. Your team has to have assets to trade for things and smart management. So you want to avoid teams that are clueless. You want to avoid teams that don't have any trade assets or that have problems with their salary cap. So LaMelo, nice knowing you, Mikal Bridges, Anthony Edwards, Luka Doncic, for a variety and range of reasons, I would not invest in those players at all either. Not due to any faults of their own, but they're just not in good situations. And that doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon, unless they get traded. And then the last one is inspires emotion. And this is where it becomes completely subjective. Basically, is this person's play or his personality inspirational? Like think about Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, even LeBron. There are aspects of their style, of their personality, of their demeanor that inspires emotion, both positive and negative, but they make you feel something. And I'm saying if you don't do that, if you don't have that type of personality, you're not exciting to watch, you're going to miss that last piece. You could be a generational GOAT, individual achievements, have titles, but Tim Duncan is the best example of this. All-time great player. Cards compared to some of the other all-time greats are not comparable despite the similar resumes. It's because he was boring. He was literally the big fundamental. That screams, I do the basic stuff really, really well, and I'm not that exciting. And so my fear for this category is Nikola Jokic. He clearly has no desire to do anything but play basketball. He doesn't have any type of sponsorships. He has no desire to do media unless like required to. Doesn't do interview, doesn't like promote himself, doesn't do anything. And so he will be the ultimate test because he could be like literally a top 5, 6, 8 player of all time. But will his lack of basically personality or charisma hold him back? I don't know. So these are the 4 criteria that I use if I'm investing in a card, in a player. And this, as you can see, using this type of criteria, it knocks out a lot of people really, really quickly. And as a result, it really narrows down the list of players that you might want to invest in your respective sports. So that's the video. Obviously, a longer video, but I am very, very passionate about this theory that I have, and I am pretty much sticking to this through thick and thin. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts as to whether or not you think I'm off base. If there's a piece of this I'm missing, if you agree, disagree, would love to hear your thoughts. And as we always do, we preview the next video on the channel. Next time out, we're going to talk about my most hated phrase in the sports cards world. You hear it all the time. You hear it all the time during negotiations. I'm into this card for X amount. I hate it. I hate it with the passion of 1,000 suns, and I will explain to you why next time. But that's it for this video. Thank you, as always, for listening and watching. Please subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I will talk to you all soon. Cheers.